like to take the time to welcome my guest tonight, Juan. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Yeah, dude, thank you for having me, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, not a problem. You want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Juan from the Juan on Juan podcast. And on my podcast, I always tell people I always talk about whatever I feel like talking about, but that usually falls in the line of alchemy, the occult, esoteric. I consider myself an occult historian, and I like to talk about interesting stuff that is not talked about as much as I'd like it to be.
Mm-hmm. What
That's
got
how.
you? What got you into the wanting to do all that? Like, there's something to set you down that pathway.
So I grew up very religious in a Pentecostal household, and I played guitar for over 5 years at my church in the worship group. And there was just questions that I would ask that I wouldn't get the correct, not the correct answer, 'cause there's never going to be a correct answer, but an answer that really fit and helped me and actually answered something for me. And it always felt empty. And the one that really did it for me was don't read the book of Enoch because you'll get possessed by demons. And I was like, what? Well, why would the Bible, the canon, reference something that's non-canon? Like what's all that about? Like, oh, there's a lot of books. So then I started digging into the Nag Hammadi, Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gnostics, and I soon learned that all the stories that had been told growing up, there's the complete opposite of that in some text, that's X amount of years old. And it made me wonder, I go, so if these people are saying that, how do we know that our stuff is the right stuff? How can we truly know it? And how can you truly know the truth if you haven't explored any other avenue? You're just looking at something from one perspective. It kind of sort of starts turning into an echo chamber. So that really set me off learning about the Gnostics. And it really started with my religious upbringing. Now, I still consider myself a Christian, but I'm a little bit more open minded. I'm not as dogmatic. And I've talked to multiple different people throughout my podcasting career. People from all walks of life, occultists, non occultists, Satanists, non Satanists, witches, whatever, like all different sorts of people. And I want to hear what everyone has to say. And I looked for shows that I wanted to hear stuff about, and there just wasn't any that really piqued my interest or were covering the subjects that I wanted to learn about. So I took it upon myself to create my show. And here we are about 5 years later, still going at it. And yeah, I honestly didn't think I was going to get this far, but here we are and having a great time doing it.
Hmm. Yeah, I started this about 2 years ago. It's funny you mentioned the Pentecostal thing because that's how I grew up too. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and I'm not a religious person now. I have my beliefs or whatever, but I'm not like an acting. I don't go to church or anything like that. I still have my belief systems, but no, like when it comes to the church vibes or whatever, I've always, and this is just me being myself, as I don't try and offend anyone out, but I feel like to have a relationship with God, you don't have to go to the church. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but that's just kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, God is everywhere, and you can tap into God or let God in anywhere you are. It's the problem is that it's a brokered experience, and they've learned to what a lot of occultists throughout history have tried to do, and they're bottling God and trying to break him down into a substance, and they found a way to hack the system. So it's like, hey, you can only achieve divinity through us. When in actuality, right, you've turned my father's house into a den of thieves. It's like he was against all that. He was flipping tables and doing all craziness. It's like he was against the very thing that you guys. And dude, whenever I talk about like some religious aspect, any religious idea, whether it be the Nephilim or whether it be some weird shape shifting Jesus story or whatever it is, that there's, I mean, there's plenty of stories. Whenever I have pushback from people, because usually people are pretty vocal when it comes to the religious stuff. If one person is unhappy with whatever I said, I just remember and I go, "Oh, wait, There's 45,000 different denominations of Christianity. I'll be all right. 45,000 denominations don't agree on one set of books. Like they extracted 45,000 different interpretations of these books, of these texts. So if one person doesn't agree with what I said, I'll be all right. You know what I'm saying? Like it's that's how wild it is. And I go, how can you truly know that what you're talking about is the thing? You know, without looking at everything else. Like you have to look at everything else. You have to leave no stone unturned when it comes to the pursuit of truth, because the truth will set you free. And ever since then, know I think I know less than I did when I first started after doing all the research and hours of content that I put out over the 200th episode. I think I'm on 210 now, plus other offshoots and other appearances. And so, yeah, I'm still going at it, and I don't think we'll ever really know until it's over. You know, when we pass on to the other side, and even then, I don't know if we'll really know because, like my dad, he had he died 4 times. He had a heart attack. His heart stopped 4 times. He was clinically dead 4 separate times. And when he came back, the first thing I asked him was like, "Yo, so what was it like? Like, what'd you see? Did you see the light? Did you walk away from the light? Like, what did you see?" He goes, "Nothing." Damn, dude, you ain't died once. You didn't die twice. You died 4 times, and you didn't see nothing. He's like, "I ain't seen nothing."
I've had that conversation before with people, and I recently mentioned it on an episode, but you know how we always envision an afterlife, like when you die, you see something, like you want to see something. I was like, what happens if we actually die and there was nothing, but we would never really know? I was like, that is the scary thought. And I think that's why a lot of people have faith and to an extent because they want the hope that there is something more. Because if we were just to die and there's just nothingness, that's pretty bleak. Like to think about, and that turns. I talked about this when I was a teenager, back doing teenage things, that partaking in those types of things. So I were in the mood for everyone because I got in that deep thought, and everyone's like, "Dude, shut up," because they didn't want to talk about that type of stuff. But I was like, that's just where my mind kind of went off to. I was like, man, what if we just like you go to sleep and you never wake up, and then you never know that
Yeah.
you even died. Like you died in your sleep, and you're just gone.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we're never gonna know until you're there. And in my opinion, maybe it's not so bad because you don't remember nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't
Mhm.
remember being nothing. It's not gonna hurt. It's not gonna be anything. So maybe we should embrace it. Maybe, but I don't know because there is an aspect of the human experience, and we see this throughout multiple ancient cultures that they were preparing for something in the afterlife. They were mummifying their dead to maybe perhaps at some point in time, maybe revive them again, reincarnate them, something, right? Recycle them, whatever it was, or something about the vessel. They still kept it. And we're talking about very, very, very superstitious people. So was it just that? Was it just hocus pocus fairy tales? And I think that what I always tell people, because the first thing that people talk about is like, oh, this is all BS. There's no, there's no such thing as the occult. There's no such thing as magic. Or there's no such thing as any of that. And I go, that's fine if you don't believe it. But the dudes in power, the dudes that are in the White House, the dudes that are in the government, those dudes are dressing up and they're going in front of an owl statue in the middle of the woods. Some are running around naked, some aren't. And they're doing ceremonies and role playing and LARPing. So there's got to be something to it,
Mhm.
even if it is some sort of mnemonic technique, where it's like you're preparing your mind, you know, if you're preparing, your state of consciousness or something. There's something with the mind, even right, understanding consciousness, understanding the soul, understanding memory, understanding all these different aspects that make us human that we still don't know about. Right. So we still don't know about ourselves, but then they want us to wrap our minds and our heads around the idea of the deity or the entity or the thing that is controlling our very reality itself. If we don't even understand ourselves to begin with, like there's things about the human experience that we don't know about. I mean, I just did a short today. I was writing out the script about how 50 to 70% of people don't have an inner monologue. Now, that's not indicative that you don't have a soul or that you're a homunculus or whatever it is, but we don't know why some people can hear themselves in their head thinking and why some can't. And they just classify it as a characteristic. So, are those people NPCs? Are those people here for texture where they quite literally can't visualize things in their mind? Eh, I don't know about you. I visualize when I'm reading, I read in my head and I hear myself in my head reading.
Mhm.
Now, if you got a whole Fight Club situation going on, seek help. When I'm talking about the voice in your head that you can control, where you can say things inside your head without saying them out loud. Do you have that?
I have it, but, like, when I was sitting there thinking, like, when I read things, I hear myself,
Mhm,
and I've talked to people before, and I never knew people didn't have an inner monologue up until recently,
mhm.
and I've wanted to actually talk to someone that said they didn't have one. I've never been able to track that down because for me, it seems strange that you wouldn't be able to, like, if you're reading a book, like you said, I hear myself reading it. And even you kind of just mentioned it, so maybe I need to get myself checked. But I've read like from different characters, and for some reason, their voices change just a little bit when
Yeah.
I'm reading it. So it's like it's hard for me to like understand someone not being able to do that.
Yeah, that was first talked about in, like, the late 19th century, and then it was left alone till, like, the mid 2000s, like, then nobody looked into it. It was, like, 18 something or other. It was this one guy, and then he was like, "Yeah, some of my peers don't have an inner monologue." How strange. And then nobody touched the research for, till 2005, and then another time in 2012, 2010, something like that. So it's like, it's this aspect of one thing about being a person that you think to you is a normal thing, so you think everyone else is the same as you. Making that assumption is the first mistake that you make. Like everyone else is like me. Everyone else, I think when I post something on the internet that I think is super dope, again, I think a majority of the internet is bots, but there's a lot of people who interact negatively
Mhm.
with it. Like, oh, that was stupid. Take your meds. You're schizophrenic. It's like, how do people not find the things, history interesting?
It's funny you mentioned that because my episode that dropped today, I was listening back to it, and I mentioned in the episode because I record, I'm almost 6 to 8 weeks ahead of what I release schedule is. So when it came out, I'd talked to the guest and I'd mentioned that someone had reached out to me as multiple people in the same day that told me they were God, which was weird. I had 3 different people within a 48-hour span that said they were a God. One lady said that she heard voices in her head and she's no longer understands that she's crazy. Everyone says she's crazy because she hears all these voices. She's actually God, and all the voices she's hearing are the people that are praying to her. I was like,
Well,
that's, I was like, I don't, it don't sound like schizophrenia to me, but I was like,
but how do you know? All right, for
yeah.
schizophrenics, how do you know that their brains don't work the way it's supposed to? You ever heard of the bicameral mind theory? The mind bicameral mind.
Mm-mm.
Uh, so back then, the brain used to operate, in two halves. One half would be yourself, and then the other half was this other voice, this thing that people were perceived as the ancestors or God or whatever it is. Well, what if? Because the first thing that they do to a schizophrenic person is what they put them on med. Boom, put them on meds. Lock it down. You can't hear that. What if? Again, they're tapping in. I've talked to a schizophrenic person where they say that these entities show them things on a screen about themselves. Now, I don't know if it's information that he didn't have prior to the entity showing him, but again, how do we not know that they're not tapping into another dimension? Or I'm not saying that she is God. I mean, we don't know that either. 'Cause, the truth is stranger than the fiction. But I'm saying, what if, like, we don't understand, there's like, "Oh, it's a chemical imbalance." Really? I mean, that's all it is, just a chemical imbalance? We I believe that the brain is one of the the most powerful supercomputers that there is, and I think that a lot of the ancients, they talked about how Plato, for example, talked about how we know everything. We already know everything. We're simply remembering over again,
I
okay?
talked to someone recently about the whole Plato in the cave thing,
Yeah.
and I'm not 100% familiar about I knew the basis of it, but, like, this person was talking to me about it, and we are talking about UFOs and aliens for whatever reason, and it made sense to think that his exact words, and I'm going to quote him here, it was, "The things that we're seeing here in the 3rd dimension are actually the aliens from the 4th dimension coming down here and fucking with us." I was like, "Okay." And this was an older gentleman, so when he said that, it kinda took me I wasn't expecting that from him, but he said that's the thesis of, like, Plato's cave. We're all trying to get out of this cave, but we don't understand that, like, there's other things going on around with the cave in certain situations, like, we see the puppets, but who's actually the ones pulling the puppet strings? And I'm like, I've never really thought of it that way, but it does make sense, and then when you bring up schizophrenia and people that talk, they hear voices or they actually see things that we don't see, what if they're tapping into that side to where they're seeing the stuff on those other realities, those other dimensions that we're not able to do with our brains the way they are right now?
Yeah, and the guy that does escape out of the cave goes out and goes, "What is it? There's a whole other world." He goes back in and he tells his boys like, "Yo, there's a whole other reality." And what do? They fight him. They go, "No, you're crazy, dude. We wanna stay here. We
Mhm.
wanna sit in front and look at the shapes on the wall because that's all we've ever known." And that's essentially what's happening nowadays with society, with everyone else. I don't like to use the term normies, but the people who don't look into whatever it is that we're looking into. Like on your show, you get into a lot of things that people wouldn't even begin to understand. That wouldn't even begin to comprehend. It's all fairy tales, and that's fine too. Like sometimes I wish I wouldn't have gotten into all this stuff because you see the occult symbolism and you see all this esoteric occult lore that's put into everything that we watch. I mean, I have two small sons, freaking watching Paw Patrol with them. I mean, there's occult stuff in that. I mean, Paw Patrol, the latest movie was they found this moon rock that gave them all powers, and they were like getting these powers from these talismans, these things that came from outer space. And there was like an evil villain who was trying to get the powers and all this. That's ideas of the occult, magical powers and powering yourself up to make yourself more powerful. So being involved in all these topics, I see all that, and you can't really. It's like in the Matrix. The dude just
Yeah.
wants to eat a steak because I know it's not real, but it tastes great, and
Mhm.
ignorance is bliss. So I get it, you know. But
I randomly will make comments here and there. I think my family probably thinks I'm out there a little bit too far at this point, but there's certain things, and I will mention stuff, and I have 4 kids, so 13, 11, 5, and soon to be 3, and I will make comments about certain things because, again, my show also dives into conspiracies and cover-ups. Some of the kids will come home from school, and they'll talk about certain things. I'll be like, "Ah, that's not really true." My wife's like, "Don't just shut up." Because I was like, "Whatever, I'm just trying to tell them the real stories," but I've noticed things too, like, on shows, and I've been to, like, older cartoons. Like,
mhm,
there's just a lot of weird things that were in cartoons that nowadays, like, my kids watch a lot of Bluey and all that type of stuff, so I don't really pay a whole lot of attention, but there's all sorts of symbolism in almost everything, and like you said, once you start going down these things and you start seeing these things, and it's like, what do you as a parent, what do you do? It's you don't wanna expose your kids to it, but at the same time, they don't even understand it, so it's just like, whatever. But
Not yet. I mean, they don't understand it yet, but it's like I believe that a lot of things are passed down genetically regardless. I think that beliefs are passed down genetically. I think that fears are passed down genetically. I think that ideas as well could be passed down genetically. And I think that it's gotten to the point already where they may not know it now, but as soon as they remember, they'll understand it. And maybe the intent isn't for them to understand it now. Maybe it's, again, this other aspect of the human experience of what if it's meant to just stay in the subconscious? Because these magicians, the what I've dubbed the sorcerers of the subconscious, they work in the subconscious. They don't work in the conscious realm. It's all about imprinting these things on this other side that emerges every now and again. And the intent is to imprint it on the other side in order for you to forget about it so it does become true. Because once you forget, because forgetting that it's even there, right, out of sight, out of mind is part of that magical operation. From what I've learned through my hours and hours of study into the occult. I mean, that's the whole premise behind sex magic, where it's about imprinting the subconscious, bringing it forth at the point of orgasm, printing it. It goes back in, and then you let it marinate essentially, and it becomes true later on. And that's just one method of many different magical systems. And I mean, there's numerous magical systems because magic, in my opinion, is a sort of force that you're able to tap into. Like the movie Star Wars, you can tap into and be a good guy, be a Jedi, or you can tap into and be a Sith Lord. But essentially, you're all tapping into one thing, and the power is, in the wielder, whatever the spear of destiny. It can either kill you or heal you. It's what you use it for. So I think that's also part of it. Maybe it's yeah, it's there. It makes for a good story. It could be like how Jung said, archetypes. But why are the archetypes there? Why are all these monomyths and all these things there to begin with? Why can we all resonate with these stories that are essentially recycled over and over and over again? And they've been told over 1,000 times in Hollywood, and they still keep making the same garbage, just under different titles.
I
So
interviewed someone recently that was a practitioner of magic. And for some reason, like when I think magic, obviously, when you think it nowadays, you think of like street magic, the magicians you see out there, like your David Blaines and your Chris Angels or whatever. I always just say they're illusionists. I don't say that's like magic or whatever. They're just tricksters or whatever. This guy claims he practices magic. He said the curses are real. You can do things to people, this and that. I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I keep getting people reaching out to me, and I haven't scheduled anything, but they are Reiki, however they pronounce masters or whatever. Never even heard of that stuff until like the last couple of years. But they claim that they can your body's energies, they manifest the energy, they can send the energies, this and that. Is that not almost like magic to an extent? Like they're using someone's energies. Now, magician people that I talk, they claim that's not the same thing because they say they talk with spirits and they use the spirits' energies and this and that. I don't know how familiar you are with that aspect to like the Reiki aspect, but isn't it all somewhat similar?
yeah, I think that there is, because there's a distinction to be made. I do think that there are what they call subtle energies, and I do think that there are, and I want to talk about it from a 16th century alchemical perspective, ma- magical alchemical perspective, because this is how they viewed it. Because they were doing both at the same time. They were doing alchemy and they were doing magic at the same time. And the way that they were able to get away with it, because these guys were church doctors and theologians and people of the faith. And the way that they were able to get away with it, they called it Christian magic. And what Christian magic was, it was natural magic, magia naturalis, which is Essentially, if God put it in nature, if I put A plus B and I get C, it's okay because God put that there, and He wouldn't have put it there. He wouldn't have wanted me to interact with it. I was just able to de-occult hidden aspects within nature. Okay, I was able to find a glitch in the matrix using nature. Now, the issue would come in when they would use astral influences or goetic, demonic, whatever it is, in the assistance of said ceremony. So you're calling upon the Goetia of XYZ and you're using those daemons or demons to assist you in your whatever. Obviously, right? The Faustian pact, you got to give something up in order to get something in return. That's when it was bad because you were using the devil or anything else. So these people at the Reiki, I've heard about it before. I think it's a form of, in my opinion, a form of, I guess, therapy, but it's like on the, it's on the, it's on the border of like being a cult. So it's like kind of woo woo, but not really. Do I believe in it? I think anything is possible. I think that you can achieve healing through frequencies and all this other stuff. And I think that there is a lot that has been occulted because of, big pharma. I've seen that firsthand with my father's health. Like there's a lot of things that it's like, yeah, it's a 30-day supply of this medicine is like $50,000. Well, what about the people who don't have health coverage or health? Like, what happens to them? It's like, well, MS doesn't kill you, but eventually it'll just your body will just degrade to the point where you're bedridden and you become a vegetable, and then your lungs stop. It's like, wow, what a slow, painful death for somebody who isn't able to afford that. And then you got the people that's like, oh, I smoke this certain herb that grows with water, sun, and dirt, and it heals me. Like, I don't have any symptoms. It's like, what does that mean? Like, it means everything's been there since the beginning. I think God put everything on this earth for us to heal ourselves. And I don't know, Reiki might be another facet of that. Again, I don't understand it enough, but that's the way I've come to understand the occult magic. And I think these guys that talk about curses and all this stuff, maybe they believe. And again, this is going back to what I said at the beginning, where yeah, I used the power of lamb to whatever, to do this. It's like, okay, and it worked. Cool. Well, I think that you believe that it worked, and that's what did it for you. Because I do think that there is it's all about the state of mind, state of consciousness, and again, this is why we don't understand enough about reality. That maybe the mind or the consciousness or the subconscious have an effect on reality. So the way I've come to understand the occult, it's got multiple facets, but one of the aspects that I like the most is about entering a certain state of mind to think about something, and if it's true to you, it'll eventually become a reality, right? You manifest it, and to me, that's called chaos magic. And what I love about chaos magic, because magical systems are meant to be evolved, and if you study magic, you see the piggybacking of all the systems. And the example that I always use is John D. and Edward Kelly and the use of Enochian. Well, he jumped over to the Golden Dawn, and then Golden Dawn, Crowley took it, and Crowley took it. Parsons used it with L. Ron Hubbard, and then from there, it's still being used, but it's evolved through its the entirety of its life, and it's been Frankenstein. It's a chimera of the original system, right? It was used. They took the original system and they used the parts that they liked, and then they inserted their own parts, and they used it like that because again, you're tapping into something, and you're able to extract it using these systems. So again, I think it's about entering a state of mind and chaos magic, which is one of these systems that it's one of my favorites because it's like, forget about all the ceremonial LARPing BS and just believe. And the problem with that is that that makes it that much more dangerous because we're talking about what are they putting in our kids' cartoons? What are they putting in our kids' TV shows? What are they putting in all these other things? Well, it turns out that chaos magicians are able to adopt any, how do I explain this? They're able to adopt things for a certain amount of time, use them for their ceremonial purposes, and then discard them because it's all about intent and belief. So they don't care about doing your magic circles and your magic rituals and dressing up in your garb and your regalia and all this other stuff. It's like, no, just use your mind and it'll, and I, so I always said, our money says with all these sigils on it, in God we trust. Well, what God is that? We all assume it's the God of the Bible. Well, we look back in history, a lot of the founding fathers and a lot of the early presidents were part of secret societies and occult orders and secret groups. How do we know that they weren't worshiping something else? Because according to chaos magic, you're able to adopt something for a set ceremony or a set working, and then after you're done, you discard it. That's why these dudes are using the Lovecraftian mythos, bro, to do their ceremonies and praying to Yog Sagoth and Cthulhu and Dagon and all these other, because they were like, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft, that was all real. He was tapping into something from beyond and bringing it forth, or something was tapping in through him, trying to break through our reality. And we use these entities in our magical workings. I mean, dude, I've been to virtual mystery schools where there are entire altars and entire setups where people do rituals in VR. Okay. So it's, again, it's all about intent, belief. And I think there's something about that concept that, William Burroughs, one of the famous chaos magicians, and really, really degenerate. I wish he wasn't so interesting. Really, I really wish he wasn't. He was also a PDF file, not to say the word, but he was also one of those. And he wrote a lot of heinous stuff when you really read his books. I don't know why he is famous, but William Burroughs did this lecture, and I think he was talking about the monkey paw and the idea of wishing. And then he said that he came across a machine that, it's in a book. I did a reel on it. And this machine, allegedly, you're able to construct it and it's able to make your wishes come true. And it was something about the machine, again, throwing everything out else out. It's like, what if you focusing like, okay, now I have a physical medium, I have this contraption, essentially is what it is, that I built, and I believe that this thing is going to amplify my wishes and it's going to make them come true. By you being in that state of mind of like, this physical medium is the thing that's going to make my, now he talked about the machine and how it made some of his wishes come true, and how there's laws and parameters that you got to follow, whatever, whatever. Now, if we take that same analogy of the wishing machine and we just extrapolate it, all right, let's zoom out. The concept of a church having an altar, having a congregation, and being laid out in a certain type of geometrical way, because I mean, all churches are laid out in a certain type of way. And you can look up Pythagorean palaces and the use of architecture as a talisman, and it's the same thing. It's about the concentration of intent at one point. You always go to church on Sunday, the same time. Some people do the same prayers over and over again. What if it's like that? What if you're just putting your wish in the well? Sometimes yours gets picked, sometimes it doesn't. But it's about, again, the manipulation of subtle energies. And the subtle energies, I don't know. I mean, I've wondered if the subtle energies are conscious or not, or what it is.
I was going when we're talking about the church and everything. It is Sunday was always considered the day that God rested, wasn't it? That's
That's the story.
the story is the seventh day God rested. What part did it say that's when you had to go to church? I don't remember where that came about. but that's become like the sacred day is like the
Yep,
holy day is your Sunday, but that was the day that God rested, but you have to go to church, but it's been implemented for so many years now that that's what everyone does, and then you're on that routine.
yep.
So,
So, again, a lot of things that people use, bro, and I mean, I've talked about this a lot, especially when it comes to technology. We're using a lot of things that we don't even understand what they were intended for to begin with. I mean, the internet was created by CERN. We know all the conspiracies regarding that,
yeah.
and the first people involved in technology, I mean, there was all about proving the existence of deity, proving the existence of Satan or the devil. I mean, I always talk about Charles Babbage and how he, as a little boy, recited the Lord's Prayer backwards and cut his hand in a circle trying to summon the devil. And he asked God, if you're real, show me the devil, show yourself, or I think it was the devil, one of the I maybe get confused, but he writes about this in a book. And I think that he did succeed. I have other evidence that he succeeded in summoning the devil. But this is the guy that was behind one of the first computers, Leibniz, the guy who was behind essentially calculus and binary code, which is the ones and zeros that your computer works off of. He was deep into alchemy, deep into the metaphysics of reality, the metaphysics of man, and he was obsessed with stories of transmutation. He was going around Europe looking for stories of transmutations. He was obsessed with Rene Descartes' work, which I think that Rene Descartes was also into the occult. But again, what we're presented in the mainstream history, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about Isaac Newton being obsessed with the apocalypse, being obsessed with drawing up and finding the Temple of Solomon, doing commentaries on the book of Revelation, predicting the end of the world. They don't talk about any of that. 'Cause it's like that doesn't fit our narrative. Like you got to believe in our stuff and all these other guys that if they did or didn't exist, because that's a whole nother rabbit hole of how
Mhm.
falsified is history, and I'm down with that too, but it's like you gotta have something to measure it out. There's so
I've actually gotten down that rabbit hole here recently with one of my friends of what part of history is real and what part of history has been changed. 'Cause I feel like history's been changed. You hear these wars and everything else, like you only hear about the winning side, like at the history of that points from whatever it happened, like whoever won that war. But throughout, just throwing this back to the Bible, I've you mentioned the Book of Enoch before. That was never considered part of the Bible, but I think it is in Ethiopia. Though they still have it in their
yep,
Bible. There's other gospels that were left out of it too. And then some of these other gospels were written hundreds of years after the fact, like the New Testament, like a lot of these things were a couple hundred years after, like Jesus or whatever. I have an episode I interviewed someone that, or it's two guys, they wrote a book called Christ Before Jesus. And they're basically saying in their book from their research and everything that they talked about a Christ, but then Jesus was basically a fictionalized version, like a character they made just to have for the New Testament. And I wasn't there, so I don't know like who wrote the who wrote the books, but they did all the analysis or whatever. But it gets you thinking, like, how many times have things been rewritten and changed in the first place? And when it comes to organized religion, and this is where I piss people off, I feel like a lot of organized religion is mainly just to control people. Like they put that in place to try and keep people in line to whatever rules. And like you just mentioned, 45,000 different denominations of Christianity. And they all have their own certain rules that you have to follow, their own certain belief systems and everything. That's just one religion, like one concept of religion, but there's 45,000 different denominations. I think about all the other religions in the world and all the other. What if the God, the creator, the ultimate creator, and I'm not trying to make it sound like simulation theory matrix stuff, but to me, it almost bleeds into that. What if the ultimate creator is the designer? He designed our universe. He designs the world we live in, whatever. That is the one God. All these other religions have their God. Maybe it's all the same God, but then everyone else came into play and they've tried to control that narrative with the people. So they've put in their own implementation, like their own thoughts, their own opinions, their own things to try and control everyone to their own stand of what they want. So you have all these different religions bleeding into it, but it all comes back to the same fact that it's made to try to control people for someone else's personal benefit.
There's various places you can go with that, but it's interesting that they wrote that book, the Christ, what was it? The Christ before Jesus? Is that what you said?
Christ before Jesus, it literally just came out in March.
That's an interesting concept because I've even seen certain grimoires that talk about maybe perhaps these messiahs being again another sort of technology. Now, treading lightly because it's a blasphemous and heretical standpoint, but if you look at all the starting points of and I agree with you, I think that maybe a lot of these religions are looking at the same phenomenon from different perspectives, and depending on your mimetic upbringing, because mimetics, creates culture. Depending on your culture is how you view this certain phenomenon. So for, in India it looks like this, in China it looks like this, in Japan
Mhm,
it looks like this, in Australia it looks like this, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of these messiahs, a lot of these figures, right, during the axial age, that was even a real point in time. You had the birth of all these figures that were the chosen ones, were the Buddhas, were the whatever, and they all kind of sort of have similar origin stories, right? And you see parallels between ancient civilizations that are separated by large bodies of water that they couldn't have, different time periods, and they all have the sort of same architecture and sort of similar names and all. There's a lot of connections that could be made, but I've seen as far as the concept of again these messiahs. Crowley talked about birthing a the new messiah into reality, using his magical method, and he talked about the Ubermensch and the Superman, and he even considered Friedrich Nietzsche a saint in Thelema, right? He called him a saint and something else, but he looked at him like this dude speaking, my language in some sort of way. And again, you'd think that something, the philosophy of Nietzsche being infused with the magical system of Crowley, it taps on all the things that we've been talking about, where they take these other concepts and they implement them into their magical order or their magical system for whatever reason. So he did take the Ubermensch concept from Nietzsche and tried to do it for real. He's like, so the Overman, I can create this thing. I can create a Messiah and birth them into reality and bring upon Ragnarok or the apocalypse or whatever the hell he was trying to do. But that's what Jack Parsons was doing too. He believed that doing the Babylon working, which essentially came from a book, Moonchild from Crowley, that he was saving this reality. He was balancing reality out by bringing in the Scarlet Woman, the whore of Babylon, Babylon being this female deity in the Thelemic religion, that by bringing her into this existence, he was evening things out. And now it's interesting to know that Parsons was at the center of NASA, JPL, all these other things, and L. Ron Hubbard was right there with him along the way. And we know what he made. I mean, it's one of the,
mhm.
my opinion, one of the biggest psyops there is. Like, if it doesn't scream psyop, I don't know what will. You
I
know,
d I've been careful to mention that too much. I don't wanna get, cease and desist letters in the mail from them. But
I think you'll be alright, bro.
yeah, I know. It's, uh it's funny to me that, when you mentioned NASA, there is a lot of weird stuff when it comes to NASA in general, and I recently saw something that completely off topic, but the whole moon landing stuff they claim obviously there's it's fake, whatever. And there was someone saying it's not fake, and then there's the stuff that they actually found on the moon, and that's why we don't go back. I was like, does anyone? I have my own personal beliefs, but what is the significance of why they stopped going to the moon? And like I said, this is completely off topic. Like we went to the moon. You don't really hear about the other missions to the moon. You heard about the first one, and then there's like several other ones that went there, and then they just completely stopped. And then they destroyed the technology before they ever went back. They said because they didn't want it to fall into the wrong hands. And no one has ever been back since up until recently. They've landed some, like China, I think, landed something up there. I think Japan supposedly landed something. But no other country's ever put a person on the moon, to the best of my knowledge, that I'm aware of. Why did it all stop in the early 70s? And why has it been so hard for everyone else to get there, but we managed to get there in 1969 on the first try?
Yeah. There's been a total of 12 men on the moon,
Yeah.
7 missions, 12, 7. Those are esoteric numbers in the occult. And I think that space, I always say space is fake and gay. And what I mean by that is that space isn't what they've told us. And in my opinion, studying all the occult, studying all the esoteric, the space plays a role in that. They use it for occult rituals and purposes. Now, if you look at the astronaut, I guess, initiation, I think that something happens that they can only send somebody into space, X amount of times before something happens to them. I mean, use your imagination, whatever it is. We're not going to really ever going to know the truth about what is really out there. But I think it was 100% faked. And I think that there's a firmament they can't get through. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say 100% that it's flat, like the world is flat. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think it's flat. I think it's something. If anything, there's more evidence, and this is always pisses people off. There's more evidence, and I'll say this loud and clear, there's more evidence of hollow earth than there is of flat earth, in my opinion. Because you can take me to hollow earth. I can go into entire forests, an entire cave, mammoth cave system. They don't know where it ends, bro. They
Hmm.
don't know where it goes to and where it connects to. There's entire forests and entire ecosystems underground. Okay. So I think that that's more possible. Now it could be flat and hollow. I mean, that could also be another aspect of it, but I do think that there is something that they can't break through. Now, the truth is stranger than fiction a lot of times. And I don't think that we've been there. And I think that everyone's in on it. And the reason that they say, there's a whole bunch of different reasons as to why we haven't gone back. Well, it's too expensive nowadays. It's like the equivalent to I don't know how many billions or almost trillions of dollars of today. I think it was an equivalent of because I recently did a reel on it, or it was like the equivalent to I don't know how many billions in 1969, and then the whole concept of losing the technology. And the people who believe in the moon landing, why do you believe in it? Because an organization, a governmental agency organization told you that it happened and they showed you some videos of it. Dude, have you seen the AI and what that can do nowadays? That's the stuff that they're letting out.
Yep.
That means that they've had this technology for a very, very long time. And people go, oh, well, the CGI in 2000, blah, 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 it was garbage. Yeah, because that's not government. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not the good stuff. That's the stuff that's the what I call the exoteric, what they present to everybody. The esoteric stuff is behind closed doors, probably in underground military bases, in my opinion. But yeah, it's just ridiculous to think that they lost the technology and we're not able to go back. I mean,
That's I've been saying for years, and again, people think I'm crazy because I said we didn't go to the moon because it doesn't make sense of why we went there. Why did we stop going? How did we manage to make it there in the first time? And just recently, I read something. And Elon Musk claims that in order to get to the moon, they're gonna have to refuel a rocket on the way to the moon. Which if space, well, I'm not a scientist by any means. If space is a vacuum, once you get outside the gravity of Earth, you're going to be continuing on at the same speed. Why would you have to refuel your rocket to keep going? Wouldn't it just keep going at the same? I also don't understand how does stuff burn in a vacuum? Like if there's no oxygen out there, how are you burning fuel through it?
mhm,
Like there's certain things, like I said, I'm just a high school guy. I went to high school and I had chemistry. Like, but there's just certain things about it that doesn't add up. And when I bring this up to people, they just get really pissed off at me because I don't know if it's because they think I'm just trying to shit all over their belief, but it's like, even as a kid, I just don't I never really thought we went to the moon.
yeah. No, I mean, and allegedly they've tested the rocks that came from there and they were turned out to be like petrified wood or something or other. And the one that really gets me is the interviews that they did of them when they came back and how unenthusiastic they looked the entire time. And it's like, you just did one of the greatest things, allegedly, in human history. And you look like that.
Mhm.
You think that you'd be, more perked up, whatever. Maybe they were tired. Who knows? Like maybe they were tired because they just freaking went to the moon.
How did they get the video camera to live stream talking to the president from the moon? They'd had FaceTime technology from the moon.
Listen, dude, it doesn't make sense. A lot of things don't add up. And I think that a lot of history, I think some of it has been fabricated, some of it. I don't think all of it. Okay. And that's the thing that I think that some of it, but it's like what some was the one that was manipulated. You know what I mean? Like what was that some of it that was
Mhm.
like you have to kind of sort of know. But yeah, look into flamenco stuff. That like reading his stuff is like, oh man. Anatoly Fomenko New Chronology, where it's like he starts making parallels and he gives it he gives you a visual. So you're really able to see the parallels between a lot of these figures in history. And I don't fall in line with the, "Oh, they added time to our calendar. There's a 13th month." Like, no, no, no. The seasons speak for themselves, okay? Like, the seasons, they change. They're on a clock. So I think that they got that part right. But, a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, they changed up everything." We're not actually in what month we're not actually in May. We're in XYZ. It's like, no, I don't think that's the case. But I think that a lot of these historical events were fabricated. And I mean, think about whenever you remember something, and I used this analogy the other day where it's like you remember a childhood home, right, in your mind. You
Mhm.
visualize if you can visualize, because we talked about
Some
people who
people
can't.
can't.
Some people can't visualize, but if you can visualize, just visualize for 1 second in your mind your childhood home and go back there today. And how different is your visualization of your childhood home versus the actual thing? It changes drastically, bro. And like I remember my childhood home in Puerto Rico, right? That I grew up in, and I went back 15, 18 years later, however long it was, after the fact, and it was completely different. Like, things are out of place, things are a lot bigger, a lot smaller. Like it's just different. So history is just like that. It's being remembered by people who probably weren't even there, and they're just taking records from an earlier guy. And dude, I've seen it time and time again, even with occult papers where researchers will not translate part of it because it's too blasphemous for them or it doesn't align with their religion or align with their worldview, so therefore they leave it out. It's like, what? You know how much you're depriving people of 1,000 years later on, where you literally occulted one aspect of it, and it changes everything because you didn't feel, it was too blasphemous for you or too gruesome or whatever it is. I've seen it time and time again, dude, where it's like, yeah, this guy didn't translate that one part. What does it say? Well, we're not gonna know because he didn't translate it, you know? So it's like you got guys like that who are controlling. It's perception management, bro. They're controlling your perception, which is everything.
I've said this before. It was funny. I was with another conspiracy type podcast, but they wanted to, I won't name who it was, but basically they didn't believe in what I had said. I was like, think about how many times the Bible's been rewritten. They're like, it's never been rewritten. I was like, there's a King James version. There's a like, there's things that's been changed. Like maybe things here and there, but it's not. The word is still the same. It's the word of God. I was like, I mean, you mean to
How do
tell
you
me,
know?
you mean to tell me that a man wrote this? Like the Bible was written by man. No, the man wrote it from the word of God.
That's called copium, bro. And I've seen that argument before. It's like, well, King James, that was the true word of God. It was, reflected through him. Okay. Well, King James was a gay and he had lovers, male lovers, and he was also writing about demons and vampires and witches and stuff like that. What does that say? It's like, well, man is not perfect. It's like, well, how do you know? It's like back to the beginning where I've had people tell me, well, I heard God speak to me. You sure about that? You sure it was God? I mean, John D. and Edward Kelly thought that they were talking to angels. And then the angels were like, yeah, you got to do one more thing before we reveal to you the secrets of this reality. And we promise we're going to get there. There's one more thing you got to do for us. They were like, okay, what do we got to do? You got to swap wives. It's like, what? These are angels. These are archangels on the other side. And they were promising you the secrets to everything. And they want you to swap your wives. What a weird request from an interdimensional galactic being that in order for them to reveal the next step to you, like, yep, gotta cuck yourselves. And they did it. I mean, that's how badly they wanted it, bro. And that's how badly people want things sometimes, that they will literally do whatever it takes. Because that's in my opinion, people this pisses people off, but I think that faith is also another form of technology. The if the most universally sought out effect, the effect that everyone wants from anything, from really any belief system, is the placebo effect. The placebo effect is magic because essentially you use your mind to cause a biological change within yourself. Okay, you know how many people have been healed through the placebo effect and they don't know why. Like why was he healed? He thought he was taking the correct stuff to fix him, and it came true. That's what everybody wants from any magical system, from any worship of any god, of praying to your god and having things come to you. That's what everyone looks for. The placebo effect, where you bring things into existence through sheer thought and make it come true. Right? That's what everyone's looking for. Like, I
Hmm.
want to think of money and I want to be able to get money. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what and having faith in something so hard, the faith is the technology. Like people, and I'm not here to demean anyone. I still believe in Jesus Christ. I still believe in God. I'm just thinking from a philosophical standpoint. Just before you tune out, think about it. You have so much faith in something that a lot of people, like for me, for I can speak personally, I was in the church because of tradition, because of my family. They were and therefore they made me go. But how many people were in the same shoes as I was as a kid, that's essentially forced into the religion? But if you think about it, you meet people all the time who they've never seen God, they've never seen Jesus, they've never felt anything, they've never seen any of that, but yet they believe. They
Yeah.
believe so hard. I'm not saying that these people didn't exist. I'm not saying that the biblical patriarchs and these biblical figures didn't exist, because there are certain occult orders like the Rosicrucians who would use the text. And this is why I think that writing is a magical process, because think about any major world religion. It's held together by what? By some old texts that were translated.
Mhm.
And that's essentially what all religions are. I mean, let's be real. What else? What else are stories? The word grammar comes from grimoire, and a grimoire is a 16th century book of spells. That's where we get the word grammar from. So when you're spelling things, you're casting them into I believe in that. And the concept of believing, so writing something down, in my opinion, solidifies things into this reality. And these mystical orders, the Rosicrucians, were entering these texts. They were entering these stories through a form of meditation. And when they would enter these stories, they would interact on the other side with said figures in these stories. Jesus, John, Paul, Peter, whatever, all these other, they were interacting with these people and they saw firsthand. So let's say that they, for the sake of conversation, let's say that they weren't historically real. But what's to say that they're not real in another dimension, in another reality that you're able to tap in through the tech? I think books are portals, bro.
Mhm.
I think that words have power. And it all goes back again to this whole idea of of visualization. Maybe that's why some people you have to be able to visualize it, dude. A lot of the stuff that when it comes to the occult, you got to be able to visualize. And like we said at the beginning, some people aren't able to visualize. It's
I've
literally a
often
characteristic of some people.
I've often wondered when people say they heard, like, God spoke to them. How do they know God spoke to them? Do they hear a voice? And does a voice in your head tell you an answer? Like, how do people I interviewed someone recently, and he is a minister. He's involved with the church. He said God talks to him every day. Well, but for some reason I didn't think about it. I was thinking about it. I didn't want to ask him because I didn't want to seem like a turd or whatever. But like, how do you know you're talking to God?
I agree with
Like,
you.
like you say God speaks to you every day. How do you know you're? Because he's all around. I can feel him. I know he's there. Well, yeah, but how do you know it's actually God you're speaking to? Like, there are other things that you could be speaking to that you think is God that wants you to believe that it's God.
Yeah.
Well, no, I know I'm speaking to God. That's where I like when people tell me that God spoke to me in a dream. Really? How do you know it was God in your dream?
Well,
Like,
this is when it gets into the this is another, and again, this is why I believe it's important to view things from all perspectives, because it gets into the phenomenological approach, where in phenomenology it's experience based. So I'm sure you talk about UFOs and abductions and all that stuff. What's like
mhm,
you can't change the mind of that person. Some people are obviously going to lie and they're going to be full of shit, right? I mean, there's always going to be that,
yeah,
but you can't, for the person who actually truly believes it, you can't strip that experience away from them because they experienced it. Therefore, it's real to them. Just because you don't comprehend it or you can't understand it doesn't take away from the fact that it did happen to that person. So again, it gets into this weird realm of like kind of sort of like the observer effect, where matter reacts differently when it's being observed versus when it's not. So it's like, well, if he experienced and he observed that particular moment in time, is it real? And then it's, not real to me. Like, I don't know. So that's another approach to reality of like, there's so many facets to it, and yet you want us to accept everything that you're feeding us from this one book that, you know, I think that the Bible is a really interesting story. I think there's a lot of stuff in there. I think it's a manual on life for some people, and that's cool. I've read the Bible. There's a lot of stuff in it I like, a lot of stuff in it that doesn't make sense to me. But hey, if it helps you out, more power to you. You know what I'm saying? Like if it makes you a better person, which is essentially what the 10 commandments say, don't be a piece of shit and be a good person. Love each other, take care of your family, love your wife, respect your parents. That's all good stuff.
Mhm.
Like don't murder people. All right, cool. I won't murder somebody. Cool. It's like those are all things universally that you should be doing as a person, regardless. You don't need some friggin', you know, interdimensional sky daddy to tell you that. I mean, some people do. I mean, we're talking about people who don't have inner monologues. They can't even freaking hear themselves read a book.
My
So they need
biggest my biggest hang up, and this is where it really irritates me with, like, Christianity and a lot of things, like, certain aspects to it, they believe if you're not saved, you don't ask Christ into your life, when you die, you're going to hell because you never asked for forgiveness. Think about children that don't understand that concept.
oh, they go to purgatory, bro. It's fine with them. they
Yeah.
they have a
Like
loophole for them.
so to me, it's like, you're telling me that this God is so great and holy and everything else, that he's going to because your children, small children that don't understand are gonna be basically stuck in purgatory or damned to hell or wherever because they didn't accept your son and ask to forgive their sins because we're all born into sin. That concept to me, I don't understand it, and it's blasphemous to say this, but if that's the way that God is, then that's not that he doesn't sound like that great of a forgiving God.
I agree.
So,
I think
that is
it's
why I don't go to church.
yeah, and I've been thinking about that. It's something that I battle with when it comes to having kids. Like, do you pass the tradition down? Do you not pass it down? Like, what do you do? And it's like, you know, I'll just let them get to my age, and then when they start asking questions, just explain it to them, and then just let them decide for themselves. Because I remember how it felt like to be in that situation and be, have that pushed upon me. So
Like, my wife and I were not religious people, but my family are. So when my children are around my parents, I will hear my daughter will come back and talk about Jesus. And I was like, okay. I don't say nothing because I understand, but at the same time, it's like I'm not going to push that on. And my older kids will come back because they went to church or something. And they come back and they tell me these things. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to church. My mom, when are you going to go to church? I'm not, mother. I'm 40 years old at this point. Just leave me alone.
yeah, and again, I don't think it's a bad thing. Uh, but I respect everyone's decisions and what they do. But I completely agree with you. I think again, at the end of the day, it's a brokered experience. You can't achieve divinity if it's not through us, and empty your pockets at the door. It's like, and we might put in a good word for you. You just make sure you always tune in every single week and give that 10%, and we'll be good. We'll put in a good word for you to the big guy. And I think it's all. I think that part of it is BS. But again, like I said, I do think that Jesus was a real person, and you know, uh, I've accepted Jesus in my life long time ago, and regardless of all the craziness that I've read, the the stuff that people don't want to talk about, that they don't like about like conspiracies or like the occult or any of this other stuff, is that it always leads back to God. Like it always leads back to the light, because
Mm.
that's what it's all about, in my opinion. And I know it's not cool to be like, yeah, Jesus is cool. It's like, I know Jesus isn't cool, but from all the stuff that I've read, I mean, it's all about trying to mimic that and pervert that in some sort of way. And it's
One
like, what imitation is the what's that one saying? Imitation is
art
the
of
one
flattery.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked the guys that wrote the book, Christ Before Jesus, I was like, how come, and this is on the woo factor here, but how come when people are saying demonic stuff or paranormal stuff or even alien abductions, if you start saying in Jesus' name and you start saying in Jesus Christ or whatever, it helps people. Like the things leave them alone. They claim to say that if you're being abducted or you start praying to Jesus. But I've heard a lot of that. So if Jesus wasn't real, Jesus didn't exist, like they're saying, why is it so prevalent in different aspects of strange things like alien abductions and like paranormal stuff, like demonic encounter, like some of the things that I've gotten into that everyone always said they plead the blood of Jesus, plead his name, like everything else. You're told that. If he's a fictional character in a book that was never true, why is there so much impact that affects different things? If the aliens are real and they're coming, they're abducting people, why if you pray to Jesus and they don't want to hear that name? If they're from outer space, they wouldn't even know what Jesus was. You know what I mean? So to me, that doesn't. That's where I get hung up on it. I was like, what is really going on? Like, are they even? If this is all true, are they actually aliens from space? Are they demons? Or like, what is that? Like, that's when you start to scratch your head. Like, and people say they've had these paranormal encounters in their house, and they go around, they plead the blood of Christ and bless my house, this and that. If Jesus wasn't real, why does it work? Uh,
Well, again, it goes back to the idea of
Belief.
belief. They believed it helped them and it drove away the demons, therefore it works. What if that's the and I'm just for the sake of conversation, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe them believing it, or maybe it's like some sort of collective egregore where, you're able to tap into it
Yeah.
and use it for whatever, because also it's like you're some interdimensional being. Well, why do you have to probe me in the ass? Like, what purpose does that serve? Why do you have to abduct the cows and do stuff to the cows? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, there's a lot of things that don't add up when it comes to that phenomenon, and it
I
doesn't make
had
sense.
I talked to L.A. Marzulli not too long ago, and like I didn't know this until I talked with him, but apparently they believe that the cattle mutilations are for breeding
The
Nephilim.
Nephilim. Yep.
You
Yeah,
know,
I've heard that.
that's the I guess incubators or whatever they need for it or whatever.
Yeah.
And other people, I don't remember the RF negative, the blood type or whatever.
RH negative.
Yeah, they claim that's a universal blood type that people can use, and they think that's what's breeding. They're using that for Nephilim too, and I was like, I have no idea. So I'm
Cool.
yeah,
Show me the Nephilim.
no,
That's what I always say. But I mean, like I said, dude, I'm a skeptic just like anybody else. That's also why I'm here. I study the things that dude, I'd love it for Bigfoot to be real. I'd love it for whatever else to be real. But again, I think that realities there's more layers to reality and the experience of being human that we got to take care of first before we can start thinking outside the box
mhm.
of whatever crazy haunted house this is that we're living in.
I've had my own weird experiences, and I always say I'm very skeptical, but I'm a lot more open-minded because once you start experiencing weird stuff, it starts to make you question things, which is why I do my show because there's things that I just can't explain that happened that if someone told me what had happened, I'd question my own. I question myself every day about it. Like it's something I just don't get past because it doesn't make any sort of sense. But I know what I saw and I know what happened. But here I am. So I'm not one to. pass judgment on anyone else for what they say happened because I wasn't there, so I can't say you're full of shit or not.
Yeah, you can be like Terrence Howard and say that you remember being in the womb.
Yeah, I don't. I haven't actually watched the latest thing that that guy said. Wasn't he talking about alchemy and stuff recently?
I only got through, I think, an hour of I think it's like a 2.5 hour episode, and I saw enough. I mean, some of the stuff he was saying was cool, but I wasn't there, dude. I can't prove it,
Hmm.
and
I
he is
haven't
an
watched.
actor,
I
so
haven't watched anything about it because you just said exactly what I was just thinking. He's an actor, so he could just be reading from whatever they wanted him to go out there and say.
anything, dude, anything.
Mm, yeah,
And it is a lot of figures in history have been ridiculed, but like Nikola Tesla and a whole bunch of other people. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. The world's a stage, right? And every man and woman has his entrances and exits. So see what happens, man.
yeah. Well, we can probably wrap this one up. But before we do, I want you to let everyone know where they can find your podcast and find more information about what you're doing.
You can find me. You can Google TJOJP Juan on Juan podcast on pretty much any major podcast platform. Also on social media on pretty much all of them. I'm also on YouTube, and you can go to my website tjojp.com and find all my stuff there, and patreon.com/ the Juan on Juan podcast, all that good stuff. And appreciate you having me on, bro. This was fun.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm glad you could get on here tonight and talk with me. I know we've played a tag back and forth trying to get this thing scheduled
Yeah.
between our schedules don't always align. I
Yeah.
usually don't record on a weekend, but sometimes I got to make the effort to. But no, I appreciate you coming on here tonight and talking with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, dude. We'll do it again
Yep.
soon.
Yep. You have a good one.